Samar, yes, welcome to the podcast. And let's just go with a story of like where you've come from and what are you doing right now. How do you get even started with all of this email copywriting and all of these getting involved with SaaS ventures and e-com ventures, and just let's give us a little bit of a background.
Thanks for having me, first of all. It is absolutely a pleasure to be invited on this podcast. You've asked a very broad question. So, do you want me to take it from the top, or do you want the condensed version?
Whatever. I think there were some interesting stories in there. I think I read on your Twitter. So
Yeah.
go. I mean, we've got plenty of time, so go for it. Whatever is comfortable.
Okay. So, 2000, December 2007, I've graduated, gotten married, and moved to the UAE within 10 days of these things happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
January 2008, I'm starting afresh in a new country. None of my immediate family is there. I am in a new country. I don't know anybody. My husband goes to work in the morning, comes back late in the evening. The entire day is stretching in front of me, and I am bored out of my mind, right? And so I have
Mm-hmm.
always been ambitious. And the idea, and also I had a mom who would wake me up at 8 a.m. no matter what. So all of a sudden, I'm responsible for my life, and like I'm waking up early because that's what I do. So I have like this huge stretch of the day, and the original idea is that I will try and find a job. Now, every time I go to an interview, I would get asked, "Do you have a driver's license?" Right? And I was like, "I don't. I just moved here, but I can get it." And I would get like, "Okay, then let's talk again when you get it." And so I tell my husband, like, these are the conversations that I'm having. And he's like, let's get you enrolled in driving lessons, right? And so we go, and just to start the driving lessons, it's a 6-month wait, right? So this is early 2008. The recession hasn't hit Dubai yet. It is crazy living there. And so I'm like twiddling my thumbs, waiting for the 6 months to be over so that I can get my driver's license. And at this point, I stop interviewing, right? Because there's no point. Nobody's going to give me a job without a driver's license. And this is pre-Careem and pre-Uber in the UAE. So there's public transport is horrible there. And so what I used to do when I was living in Pakistan before my marriage was I was a personal blogger where, blogger.com was a big thing back then.
Yep.
People would personal blog. And then there used to be a citywide blog called metblogs.com. And I was part of it, right? And so it was a group of great writers. There was an editorial process, and I knew that I really, really enjoyed it. And one of my pieces had been published in a Sunday magazine as well, right? So I was like, I did it as a favor to a friend, that Sunday magazine piece. But 2 weeks later, there was a check in the mail. And so here I am in Dubai thinking, if there's money in writing in a country like Pakistan, there's money in writing online. And so I run a Google search saying, for writing jobs online, I find a website that is paying me $10 an article. And I think I have hit pay dirt, right? I'm so happy. I'm over the moon. But what I had really hit was a content mill. And I realized that pretty early on. And so there was no editorial process. There was just nothing. I was writing about the most weird topics. And so for the first 2 years of my business, I Googled my way through it, right? And so every time I would have a question, I would Google it. And it wasn't until I was making enough money to invest in courses that my business really started to take off, right? And so in about 2011, I signed up for my first writing course because I saw these. I was a fan of Copy Blogger by that point. I saw all these amazing copywriters that were doing big things, and content writing was something that I really enjoyed. And so I take that course, and it blows my mind, right? My writing, it was a very interactive course. It was one of a kind. I want to give a shout out to James Chartrand. She used to run a business called Men's with Pens at the time. And so I honed my skill. I'm now confident in it. And now I'm also, because there was a Q&A aspect to that course, I asked her business questions, and she was very generous in her knowledge, and I was able to learn, right? And so I discovered guest blogging through it. And guest blogging was a very, very effective way for me to market my business. And I went on to write for brands like Marriott, Intercontinental, MetLife, Aetna, and then for startups as well. And for startups, I used to write blog posts and ebooks. For magazines like Marriott and Intercontinental, used to be like proper articles with citations and everything. And so I used to enjoy that work, and I did it for 10 years. But in 2017, I started burning out. right? And I was losing interest. It got to a point where I didn't want to get up in the morning because I was like, I have to go to work, I have to start working, and it's let's take it easy today and all of that. And so around December or November 2017, Joanna Weave of Copy Hackers launches 10x Freelance Copywriter, which is a business course for freelance writers, right? And I'm like, okay, so maybe I'm confident in my writing abilities. I know how to market my business. Maybe it's the way I've structured my business. Maybe I'm not efficient enough. That's why, it's not interesting to me anymore. I signed up for that course. And 2 modules in, I realized that I am done writing content. It's not that I'm burned out. It's just that I'm done. And I always say that content writers have a shelf life, and mine was 10 years. But then I have a dilemma, right? The only thing I've ever been good at is writing. And so I'm like, okay, so if not content writing, then copywriting. And one of the key things I feel that I was able to grow my business has been because I'm an implementer at heart. Every advice I would read, I would simply implement it to see whether it would work, right? And probably that's why, to this day, I know whose advice works and whose is utter shit. And I implement and discard at a very, very alarming speed. And I adapt as well, because what I realized is conventional advice that works for Western audiences or Western copywriters does not work for people from developing countries like that. So there was that aspect of it, right? And so I try my hand at website copywriting, landing pages, sales pages, and pretty much cried through it all. I did not enjoy it, right? And around that time in that course, I met Val Geisler, who was specializing as an email strategist and copywriter, and she put out a call for subcontractors. And I reached out to her and I said, listen, I don't have any experience except for writing newsletters for my own list, but I'm a fast learner and I don't make the same mistake twice. Will you please take a chance on me? And she did. And she gave me 2 weeks to write a re-engagement sequence, I think. And that first week, I was just researching for 6 to 8 hours a day, and I was waking up early again. I had a spring in my step, and by the time I turned in my first email sequence to her, I knew that I had found my passion. And it also helped that I was really good at it, and that Val was an amazing mentor and teacher, and she really guided me and helped me hone my skills. So that was the origin story of how I became an email copywriter.
Big shout out to Val. So I actually got started with my podcast because I put out a tweet looking for guests, and she actually did a retweet, and then a bunch of people actually turned up. So there's Joel Kletke, who's also a very good copywriter, and lots of other people came in. And so big shout out to Val. You've been helping out Samar and I.
Absolutely, she is one of my favorite people, and so is Joel.
Yeah, I mean he's got a sense of humor, so, which a few people get, but like but he's a genius with words, so it's great. All right, really, this is a very cool story, in terms of how you sort of move from content and right up to copywriting, and of course specifically for email. But before we get into email and a bit of, let's say, talking about SaaS ventures that let's say you write about now, help us out with understanding the key difference. And I know it's a very fundamental question, but key difference between like content and copy. And I think a lot of people get confused with those two. And I know there are like some overlaps as well, but it's not just for beginners, but I just feel a lot of people who even write copy or write content for a long time don't really understand the key differences. So just can you like help us out with that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So at the heart of it, all writing is copywriting. Right? So even if you are writing a content piece, right? Even if you're writing a blog post, you're writing a headline so that people would read that first sentence of your blog post, right? You're writing that first sentence so they would read that second sentence, and so on. So it's all persuasive writing, and persuasive writing is copywriting. The medium is the only thing that makes content or copy, in my opinion.
And did you realize that after you actually tried your hand at copy, or throughout your entire time that you were writing content, was it the same mindset that you were writing words to persuade from like the headline to, because I'm sure that was what it was, but still, like, I think when you learn copy, specifically, at least in a little bit of my experience that I've seen, it tends to be a little more strategic in terms of how you're
Yeah.
placing things versus content, which is more about engagement, more about generally it's just general entertaining pieces that you sort of write.
Yeah.
That's sort of my. So did you learn that like after writing content for 10 years and then moving to copy, or was it like, oh, you realized along the way?
I learned how to write. So when I was doing content, I was taking all those courses. I learned how to hone my headline writing skills. Right, that
Mm,
translated really well, and I think this is why I do so well in email. The
mm,
headline writing skills translated into email subject line writing skills.
mm,
The intro writing skills, all I had to do was condense the intro into one sentence, and that
yep.
was my opening line of the email, right?
Mm,
And so it just kind of every part of the content pieces that I was writing would
mm,
just become more condensed. And the way I see email is that, let's say you take a sales page or you take a long form blog post, right? And you want
mhm,
to, there are a bunch of big messages in there. You
mm,
divide that into a number of emails and you send it across. So
mm,
one of the things that I always say about emails is that yes, conversion is one event,
mm.
but for that one event to happen, you have to provide multiple opportunities.
Right.
And so
Mhm,
email marketing makes so much sense to me in that sense.
mhm,
And also shelf life is the only thing different from like copy and content, I feel, is also shelf
mm,
life.
mm.
Because like everybody forgets the blog post that you published 4 days ago,
Yes.
but an email is something that not everybody will see and you can resend it later on.
Mhm,
A sales pitch is something that you can reuse again and again every time you're selling or turn it into an evergreen thing. Same goes for landing pages, same goes for website copy. It's the
got it.
shelf life that I feel is the big thing.
Got it. I want to dive into email, in terms of SaaS and ecom, so which one do you prefer more? And let's pick one of them and actually get into it, because I think, I don't know if they're different for each, because I would imagine they're different considering, the decision making process of the customer is slightly different when they're buying. Also, the awareness level of the customer is different when they're buying SaaS versus, let's say, ecom. But like, how do you take like how much of that do you take into consideration in terms of when you're writing for SaaS or when you're writing for ecom, and just break it down for us a little bit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. So SaaS is what I enjoy most because that is the industry that comes to me with the trickiest problem.
Mhm.
But e-commerce is the one industry that I feel needs the most help. Right. So um, I feel like what for me it's not the customer journey. Actually, it is from what you were saying, right?
Let's say if somebody's a SaaS owner right now or marketing to SaaS ventures, just break it down in terms of like how email copy would sort of, let's say, help them. What are the factors that go into it, and how do you approach it?
Okay, so every customer touch point that you have, you need an email for it, right? So
Mhm.
if somebody's landing on your website, what are they doing? If you have a content marketing program, then they are either signing up for your newsletter or they're signing up for your free trial. Or if you're a B2B, then they're requesting a demo. That is the goal. If I know nothing about a SaaS brand, I would assume that that is the goal, right? So then you need to decide, okay, so if they're signing up for the newsletter, what email am I going to send them? If they're signing up
Mhm.
for the free trial, what emails am I going to send them? If they're signing up for the demo, what emails do they need to get? And the only way you can map it out is if you map out your customer's journey and the touch points and then create an email journey map throughout. So when that touch point happens, you need to ask yourself, what emails do I need to send? Right?
Mhm.
What information do I want them to have to make the decision that I want them to make? Then you need to ask them again, what do I want them to do? Which will tell you the next step after what happens when they do what you want them to do. And
Mhm.
lastly, the most important that I've seen nobody else preparing for, I feel, is the majority of your users and subscribers who will not do what you want them to do, who will
Mhm.
not convert, right? And so you need a plan for them. What happens if they don't convert? What happens if they don't do what we want them to do? And
Mhm.
so create a plan for that as well.
Mhm.
And so if you do that, the email journey map will just start building itself, right? So let's assume the first step is signing up for the newsletter, right? Okay, so what emails do you want to send them? What is the purpose of that newsletter? The purpose is generally, if you have a free trial, we want to push them towards a free trial. All right. Then your welcome sequence or your nurture sequence is pushing them to a free trial. If they convert and sign up for the free trial, what do we want to happen next? What do we want our users to do next? Which is become paying customers. Then that means we want to send them free to paid onboarding sequence. And then so on and so forth, right? And on the flip side, you're also asking yourself, what happens if they don't sign up for the free trial? What emails are we going to send them then? And the answer is usually, like our regular newsletters, feature releases, regular or semi-regular pushes to, again, keep trying again and again to get them to sign up to the free trial. And then if they don't convert into paying, then you need to sit down and come up with a strategy. Okay, what are we going to do now? How are we going to handle the non-converts almost, right? And so then you have to decide, are we going to offer them a week-long extension and then create an email sequence for that extended amount of time, or are we going to handle this differently? And so at each point, that is when strategy also comes into play, where you have to make all these decisions. I feel like I gave you a very detailed answer.
You did, and I was actually, you mentioned all the onboarding stuff, and let's say pushing everybody to the trial, but and then of course, recently I've seen like a lot of cancellation flows also is something that a lot of people are using right now, and of course, like some ventures make it very difficult, others sort of emotionally try to sort of let's say wrestle the customer into sort of let's say, oh, we're going to miss you, and how do you approach like something like a cancellation flow, and how important do you think that is?
Okay, so I'm going to take it a little from the top again, because I feel so strongly about this. A lot of times you'll hear people say, send retention emails. I don't believe there is such a thing as a retention email or a retention email sequence. I believe there are retention focused emails, and they all depend on the situation that the SaaS company is going through, right? So let's say it's your typical SaaS company. I know nothing about it. I know that you will need a retention focused email sequence for canceled users, for failed payments, and for one more that I'm forgetting, but for expiring cards, right? Dunning. And that's something
Dunning,
that I
yes.
always recommend my SaaS clients, like, you need to look into that, because these are paying users that are that might cancel out just because they don't even know their cards are expired. And so from there, it's all about strategy, right? What is the situation that your SaaS is in? So if you want to retain them, why wait until the point that they're canceling? Why not start your onboarding with retention in mind? And this is where strategy comes into play, right? And again, second one of my SaaS mantras is start your onboarding with retention in mind, so that it doesn't get that bad where you have to sit down and think, okay, so we need to retain our users because we're losing them, right? And so if you're starting with retention in mind, you already are thinking about the cancellation. So what are the reasons that they could possibly cancel? You need to deal with it before it gets to that point. And one of my favorite ways of increasing retention is pushing users to the annual plan. And it's a very low hanging fruit where you can, so again, moving on from that mental flow chart of what happens when they upgrade to a paying and become a paying customer, is that what do we want them to do? So if a SaaS has a tier-based pricing system where they upgrade based on the usage, we want them to increase their usage so they move on to the next tier. But if they don't, and even if they do, the next step is to move them to an annual plan, where we get them to sign up for the year. We make it worth their while, and it's more for them to. The longer they stay on, the more they'll use, essentially.
Right. And I think what you're basically pointing out is, instead of having a reactive approach to something like retention, have like a proactive approach. So you're actually factoring all of that in and throwing in, let's say more education or more use cases or, stuff that's going to be more relevant to them. But that's at the beginning rather than, trying to react to it.
At every step, I call them proactive customer service emails, by the way. So I love that you picked that on that wording. And so if, a cancellation or if a renewal is coming up, let them know beforehand that a renewal is coming up, especially if they're on the annual plan. Like I would say, even for the monthly plan, to be honest, you need to let them know that we're going to charge your account. And for SaaS clients, one of the things that I always say is, do not be afraid of cancellations. Do not. It is founders understand that it is part of the business, right? But it is
Yep.
also an opportunity to get feedback. Why are you
Mm.
canceling? And it allows you that qualitative data that you collect, it allows you to get ahead of problems before they become problems. And
Mm.
so, as a strategist, I have all these conversations with SaaS companies, and it is so fascinating when a tricky problem comes to me, and then we get to sit down and brainstorm and solve it.
And do you think this is not just like sales or marketing, but also feeds into product? Like you just said, like, that you actually get feedback from the customer. And do you think a lot of people underestimate how much email can actually feed into getting product feedback, in terms of getting those conversations with people? Because everyone's so focused on growth and marketing and sales that they actually miss the entire point. So, I'm sure that informs how the cancellation flow is or retention flow is, because do you think that comes down to the founder? Like, do you see more product founders do want more product feedback versus marketing focused founders want like more sales? Is that like, do you see that play out as well in terms of product feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I am creating an onboarding email sequence, step one of my process is voice of customer research, right? And so when we are doing that, we find out a lot of stuff that goes into the report that we do talk about, and we say this was important enough to put into the report, even though, and at some in some respect, it does inform the onboarding that I'm plan that I'm creating for them, right?
Yeah.
Because now I know that these are the roadblocks that they're facing, these are the problems that they're facing, these are all the issues that they're having, and so I need to set expectations.
Mm.
And it's again all of this when you start thinking like this, and I'm so happy you asked that question, is because then that's when you become a strategic partner as an entrepreneur and a freelancer, right? That is when you get to sit down. This doesn't really concern the onboarding, but this is the feedback we received, and here it is as a gift to you
Mm.
to do with whatever you want, right? This
Mm.
is solid feedback that you can use to make proactive decisions or however. And another thing that I always emphasize on is that there's no such thing as the perfect scenario for onboarding,
Yeah.
right? So when I'm making strategic recommendations based on the voice of customer data that I have, I always say you need to tell me which of these recommendations you can realistically implement. Because I will give you a perfect scenario onboarding, and then you are unable to implement parts of it, and then the conversions are going to tank. And so I am like, do not hesitate. If out of four you are telling me we can only implement one, it is my job as your strategist to find a way through. And so having those open channels of communication is also super important, and it just overall informs the entire SaaS company.
So I'm going to quickly go to ecom, because I think
Yeah.
that's like the next thing that I want to sort of understand, like how ecom is different and like what's your, let's say, process or what are kind of things to do. And then I want to hit on something which I'm going to give you a little bit of time to think about is, do you think it's going towards a lot of hyper personalization where, like you said, onboarding, right? So is the awareness level of the customer is like, every customer is different. So do you think that's going to inform? I don't know if that's what's already happening with a lot of ventures, but what I do see is that in general, when you're like, let's say, a SaaS venture, you just have one onboarding sequence, but then the types of customers that you have, a different level of awareness, a different level of, let's say, exposure, is actually requiring maybe 5 different kinds of onboarding sequences, because they all are not trying to answer the same question when they hit upon the let's say, the platform. So I'm going to leave that there just in the air a little bit.
I don't
And
need
then,
to think about it because I have been doing those kind of onboardings.
perfect. Let's go to ecom and then head to the
All right,
personalization bit. So
perfect.
give us a little bit of like, okay, how's ecom different? What's happening, in terms of email within that space?
Okay, so e-commerce is a lot more immediate. There's a lot more
Mm-hmm.
instant gratification in that industry, right? It's a lot more measurable, easily measurable, I feel. So for onboarding sequences, I know my clients have to set up things a certain way so that they can track those conversions. It's not always easy, but for e-commerce, it's super easy. The ESPs usually take care of it.
Mm-hmm.
But what is different is the life cycle, right?
Mm.
The customer life cycle. They are actively looking for something to buy. They are actively looking to solve a problem immediately. And the minute they see a product that can potentially do that for them, they will buy it. And so again, it starts from the same place. They land on your website, they sign up for your newsletter, but then it changes from there, right? You send them the welcome sequence. What is the purpose of that welcome sequence? It is to encourage that first purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And then if they're abandoning a cart, they need to go they need to be sent in abandoned cart sequence, which by nature are creepy, but that's a longer conversation, so I'm not going to get into that.
Sure.
And then the post-purchase and all of that. So again, you have to map out the customer journey and then see how it translates into email and create an email journey out of that.
And then, in terms of e-com, do you think like it's also down to that people aren't spending enough time to actually understand? I see a lot of like volume pushing or quantity pushing that's done within e-com, that it's just push push push. Do you think like people are missing out on maybe a different, let's say, space of the market when they only target people based on like very heavy sales tactics, instead of maybe informing them a little bit about not just the product but the overall thing? Like,
Yeah.
have you seen more educational content being useful within ecom when you talk about, let's say, for example, if let's say you're a company that sells home care, or let's
Yeah.
say these kind of things, and then not just selling that product, but like overall informing or helping somebody maybe improve the overall living space that they live in. Are you seeing more educational stuff coming in within the email
I
space?
don't know if I'm seeing it, but I'm definitely doing it for my
Oh, you're doing
clients.
it. Okay,
Yeah.
great.
So one of my ethos is value is greater than a discount.
Mhm.
So find another way to provide value instead of a 10% discount or a 20% discount, right? It is a great option when you're building your list. But as soon as you hit that 10, 12, 15,000 subscriber mark, you need to start getting strategic, because that is, even if you can get like 40% of that list into the engaged segment, you are set to get good numbers. And the best way to keep subscribers engaged is to create brand loyalty with them, is to create affinity, is to make them trust you as a brand. And sales do not create trust. Educational content, showing people that you care about them, sharing informational stuff with them is. And one of the beauty of e-commerce emails is that there is no rule or law that says you cannot sell in an educational email.
Oh
So
yeah,
if you
sure.
are, let's say you're a home cookware brand and you are selling, you want to sell pots and pans, you can share recipes, and then at the bottom of that email you can highlight, this recipe would be so easy to cook in this pan or in this wok. And
Right.
so just, it is easy to tie content to products in e-commerce, and I feel like it's an easy win, it's low hanging fruit that a lot of brands are missing out on.
What do you think is a challenge? So we got the easy bit within ecom. Like, where do you think the challenge comes in when you're trying to sort of, let's say, do you think it comes down to the type of product, or maybe certain kinds of customers or certain kinds of markets that you're trying to, so let's say, market to? Maybe there's a lot of competition. What kind of challenges do you see when you're, let's say, working on, let's say, email marketing within ecom?
The challenge I see for brand on the brand side is that they're struggling to focus on either the sales part of it or the list building part of it, right? So you could have all the emails you need, but if you're not actively building your list, then it's not going to do you much good, right? So there's always like, what comes first, the email list or the emails? And the answer is both.
Right.
And so first focus, start, put together a 3 email or 5 email welcome sequence, put together a 3 email abandoned cart, put together a 3 email, actually forget the post purchase, Shopify takes care of that. You don't have to get very fancy, but you do need to get everything in order to start building your list. And that starts from the offer that you're going to make. What is that offer going to be? Discounts are an easy but lazy way. But then there are quizzes. There is free shipping, and I had a brand that had a free sample, and everybody had to pay a $7 shipping,
Yeah.
right? And it
Yeah.
wasn't
Yeah.
doing too well. But when we flipped the script and we made the sample maybe $14 or $21, I'm forgetting the exact number, and we made the shipping free,
Right.
conversions soared. And so it also depends on understanding your audience, right? Understanding your
Right.
subscribers, what is important to them. I am a big skincare and beauty brands geek, right? And so there's a brand called Journey Beauty. I love their products. They're great for they see skin like mine. And I was shopping from them, and I was ready to pay the international shipping to Pakistan because I love their products that much. But when I get to the post-purchase page and I'm checking out, it says free international shipping. My mind was blown right there and then, right? And it turned out it was free international shipping for $50 and above, and my order was obviously over that. But like,
Right.
I didn't even pay attention to if they had any marketing about it on their website. I didn't pay attention to it. I wanted that product. I went straight to that product page and I ordered, and it was such a pleasant surprise.
Mm.
And so I feel like these are all the ways that you can surprise and delight and create brand loyalty. Tiny small things.
Got it. Ultimately, it's going to come down to we should name the podcast episode "Tiny Small Things."
Absolutely.
That's what it's going to come down to. All right. I left you with the segmentation bit earlier, and let's
Yeah.
go with that. Let's go with hyper personalization, or let's say segmentation in terms of the list and all of that stuff. For SaaS and for e-com, do you think we're going there? Where I don't know if you're already doing that, but where people will have to factor in that there's so many different kinds of audiences, or buyers of their product, that they might have to factor in from the beginning that the journeys are different. It's not just
Yeah.
one customer journey, it's multiple segments of them.
Yeah. So there are 2 to 3 ways to handle it, right? The super basic way, if you are not doing anything, is in your first email, in the welcome email, which is often the most opened, ask them about it. What is your, if you are going by difficulty experience level, then yes, that, or by role, then that. And get them to self-segment. The second option is get them to choose when they're signing up so that the software knows from the get-go which sequence to send them. The third is, and this is, I think, more particular to B2B SaaSes, where they have roles assigned, right? So it's a big, let's say a project management software is being used by creatives, salespeople, the accounts department, and all of that, right? And so you need to create onboarding sequences for each role. And so in my experience, that's at least what I've been doing. If it's a B2B SaaS, I always look for roles. Is more than one person going to be using that software? What are their roles? What are their experiences? And in B2B SaaS especially, there's a part where not everybody needs access to everything. And so you have to be super careful about what you show them and tell them. Simply because if you send them an email that only an admin has access to, then they're just sitting there confused, thinking, I don't see that option.
Right.
How do I do that? And so personalization in SaaS comes in many, many forms.
All right. And then in terms of e-com, do you see that as well? Or it's just like, okay, one kind of customer is coming in, you're already pre-decided, or are you seeing a little bit of that in, let's say, e-com as well? Or are you
So
doing
in
that as
e-com, it depends more on the product category and the product type, right? So that's how often I would segment people. And then we also segment by the amount of order value, right?
Yeah, I
The
was gonna
AOV,
ask
average
that.
order value. Yeah.
I was
And
gonna ask that. Yeah.
and then one of the other ways that I do is by how often are these people shopping from us? So somebody who's a returning customer, and this is where the difference in tone and voice comes into play, especially for e-commerce brand, right? Somebody who's buying from you for the first time, it's going to be a friendly, welcoming tone of voice. Somebody who's coming to you for a second time, it's going to be friendlier. It's going to have that element of familiarity. Third, fourth, fifth time, these people love you. You need to treat them differently. So if they were your friend, they could drop in on you at any time. And so the tone and voice needs to reflect that they need to be treated differently. And so, there are multiple ways that we can segment. And
Sure.
again, tiny little things that are easy to do. And it's probably why I get so frustrated with the e-commerce. It's like, it's easy to fix.
In terms of like, do you think it comes down to the team and like what they're really going after that determines a lot of how they're approaching the strategy? Because there are a lot of people who are focused on the customer experience versus a lot of, let's say, founders or teams that are focused on like profit right now. Do you think like that determines a lot of the strategy, or like what's been your experience?
I'm glad you asked that question, but I would say I have so much respect for founders. They are juggling multiple things, right? And they're putting out fires. And I've seen this firsthand because I get to work with SaaS and e-commerce founders all the time. And so I feel like there are phases, right? And so when you are in that profit growing mode, you will do anything and everything that feels right at that time to grow your profits. But once you've put out all the bigger fires and then you ignore email marketing, and that's when more fires started popping up because you didn't take care of this part. And that's when SaaS founders and e-commerce founders often realize that, okay, now this is the time to focus on emails. And that's when they usually come to me. So I feel like I wouldn't say brands are focused on profits all the time. I feel like it depends on what phase of growth they're
Hmm. All right. I want to quickly dive into your own journey as a freelancer, and like working remotely, of course, right now. But I mean, I'm sure most of your work has been remote,
in. Yeah.
considering you've been working. So it's also probably pre-pandemic that you've been like doing remote anyway. Tell us a little bit about that, like in terms of how's that experience been as a freelancer working with companies from outside, and how's it been for you?
It's been so I've been remote from the get go, right? So when I started in 2008, I was living in the UAE at the time. Obviously, there was no such thing as content writers for companies at that point. Dubai was slow to catch on, and so all of my work has always been for US clients or Canadian or Australian and things like that, right? And so I have always been a remote worker, and for about the first 10 years of my business life, which was when I was doing content writing, I did not show my face on camera. I did
Mm,
not hop on calls.
right.
And simply because I was so afraid of the reactions that I would get.
Mm,
And so I was
mm,
an email only business. And
mhm.
obviously, nobody trusts you over email, like over a
Yes.
certain amount. And even then, like I managed to get it to a point where I was being paid $1,000 per blog post simply because
Mm,
I had that much authority because of the guest posting that I had done.
mm,
But it did take a toll on me, right? Because
right.
every time a client would suggest a call, I would have to go through the mental gymnastics of skipping that part.
Yep.
And then when I joined 10x freelance copywriter, Joanna Weed just told me to put my big girl pants on and do it.
Mm, mm,
And so I did the work, and surprisingly, I don't know why it didn't occur to me before, but doing video calls kind of took away that fear simply because I could tell immediately who had a problem with
mm,
me, right? And
mm,
so
mm,
I was able to shut that down really, really fast. And because my face was everywhere online, the
mm,
people who were okay with me were the only ones reaching out.
right. Mm. So in a
And
way, it was actually helpful to you, like
yeah,
in that sense, but it was much harder. And I actually just going to ask you that about, of course, the biases, and you, of course, took it up. Um, I'm generally of a sort of, let's say, worldview that there's some advantages to that and disadvantages as well. I think the advantage is that, of course, we are able to sort of, let's say, um, bring a different, let's say, viewpoint, or a fresh perspective to even the content that's been written. And I think a lot of people sort of underestimate that they think that, um, like, let's say, the external focus is much more rather than the focus on the work, because we process things differently. At least from Southeast Asia, I'm from India, and
yeah.
grown up through different backgrounds. Do you think, like, so first, of course, tell us a little bit more about how did you sort of, let's say, overcome that a little bit, or how did you sort of, let's say, was it just because you've been doing it for so long in terms of just volume, or that eventually just died out, or was it like something else you did? That's number one. Number two is, of course, do you think your own experience of growing into it, like growing up in a different country, actually helps you, or in terms of the kind of content that you write, because you're much more actually, tell us about that. Like, are you, do you see that when you're writing content?
Okay, so I think because I spent 10 years in the UAE, which is an extremely multicultural society,
Mm,
it didn't affect me that much.
mm,
And so I wasn't used to being different, right?
mm,
Hijabi women are the norm there.
right.
And so for the first time that I felt odd was when I would think about getting on video calls and stuff, right? And depending on the biases, I've been asked questions that people don't even realize are offensive.
Mm,
How come your English is so good? It's such a common
mm,
question. Um, and then comments on my hijab, like, do you wear it in the loo too? And like,
mm,
what does that have to do with my writing?
right.
And the answer to, and I've always been polite and nice about it, like where when they say, how come your English is so good? I tell them, my parents always put a lot of emphasis on education, yada, yada, yada. In my head, I'm saying, because I went to school, you dipshit. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
and I have a slightly inappropriate sense of humor, which I tried to hide, but like I realized
Sure.
that staying quiet about it is not
Mm,
going to help. People will
sure.
continue to ask me these questions and not even realize these are offensive questions.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And so it's when people ask me questions like this, it tells me more about them than
Sure, of
anything else, right?
course.
And the more I have been showing my face online, the more I've been talking, these questions
Mm.
have reduced more and more. And I realized that being vocal about my identity, showing up more, showing up in rooms where there was nobody else like me, has just kind of
Mm.
paved the way for other Hijabi women and Muslim women as well.
So do you also think that a lot of this then also comes down to, at least in my experience, has been more internal than external? Because for me, of course, also I look different. A normal course, I don't wear a cap to all these things. It's a turban, and I've been in
Yeah,
that space for so long. Always been, of course, the outsider to the industry to begin with, because I'm a
yeah,
lawyer to an entrepreneur, and then a bunch of different businesses, different sectors, different geographies. So I've always, eventually come to the realization or the conclusion that, okay, you know what, yeah, it's more internal than actually external. And I just left it at that, because I never actually wrestled with that beyond the point, because I figured that it's never going to be enough to convince anybody or anything. So you might as well just keep on doing what you're doing anyway, without any filter or added effort. Was sort of, let's say, my journey to it, because I figured that you could just be, and not really add anything to this conversation. Like, the question, even when I was asking you that, it was more like, let's say it's an obvious experience that you
yeah,
had, but in general, like, like, for example, when I was looking at, let's say, inviting you for the podcast, right? No, none of these things actually come to mind for most of
yeah,
us, because we're like, oh, you know what? I mean, it's never actually. In fact, I
yeah,
think you suggested it when we were discussing it before, and I was
yeah.
like, okay, cool, let's actually talk about that. But do you think a lot of this then comes down to, for anybody who's listening, do you think a lot of this is internal for them, that they need to sort of be at peace with, who they are to begin with? Because I
I
think there's
think
a lot
so.
of.
I agree with you. And for me as well, it has been intrinsic, right? All of that growth has been happening internally where I just don't care anymore.
Yes.
People who are okay with me are going to come and work with me, and companies like HubSpot, Pinterest, Drip are okay and working with me. And so, my
Yeah.
business is going great. You are happy to stay in your bubble with your biases. But also, I am extremely good at ignoring
Hmm.
racist behavior. I
Hmm.
would just pretend that I didn't see it. And I
Hmm.
would go and do what I needed to go and do.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I
Hmm.
realized that just ignoring it kind of
Hmm.
allowed me to achieve whatever I wanted to achieve and do whatever I wanted to do.
Hmm.
And so I've just gotten really, really good at ignoring it. Like there are still people who are nice to me publicly,
Hmm.
ignore me privately,
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
and I'm still here, and it's totally
So,
okay.
I just want to clarify that for people who are listening, in terms of, let's say, um, and I'm asking you that as a question, because
Yeah,
people take it, let's say, from a different perspective. Kids
yeah,
who are listening, or young freelancers or entrepreneurs or founders. Um, my understanding of that is basically, as soon as you give somebody an audience for hateful speech, or for, let's say, you're acknowledging what they're saying, and then you got to address it. That's what she probably means, that by not giving them that audience, right? Because
yeah,
she doesn't have to respond to every single person that comes has an opinion on, let's say, something
yeah.
like this. That's my understanding of what you're trying to say. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely. So do not react, essentially.
Mm.
They're looking for a reaction.
Yes, actively looking for
Let's
it. Yes.
act. Yes, exactly. And so
Mm.
let's not, because there is a saying in Hindi and Urdu. I don't know if, like, I don't know how to translate it in English, but right, but it's
Sure.
"Mere baap ka kya jata
Mm.
hai," right?
Mm. Mm.
And my
Mm.
dad is a funny guy.
Mm.
When he was trying to explain it to me when I was a kid, he said, "What goes of my father?" And that has become my mantra, right? If this
uh,
person is doing whatever they're doing, how does it affect me in my life? Like, it
mm.
really doesn't.
Right.
I
Yes.
will go on to do and achieve whatever I want to. That person doesn't have control over my destiny or my work or
Yeah,
my
yeah, I mean, exactly
intelligence
the
and my
exactly
drive.
the point. Yeah, exactly the point. Like, I think just acknowledging the existence of an audience like that, I think, gives them more power. You just do what you gotta do, and I think, the world is, like, so open to anyone who's listening. I have a lot of people who, a lot of freelancers, and people who are ex-employees of mine or current employees, and they keep on having this conversation. Or, because you're from Southeast Asia, our accent is different, or this is different, or that, and I'm like, you're just going by an external view of the world of you. instead of actually focusing on what you got to do. And if it's something that you got to do, then just like go and get it and do it. Don't worry about the
Yeah.
opinion, because people are actually going to try and actively stifle you out, just for their own pleasure, or just for their own, let's
Yeah,
say,
absolutely.
confirmation bias that they have. So yeah, I think I really admire, and also I just feel, not just in terms of admiration and inspiration, because I think the media makes a lot of that. I just feel it's normal behavior. It's just that
It
you get
is.
to a point. Yeah, I
It
mean,
is.
you
Yeah.
get to a point when you're pursuing something which is more important to you and your family, and the people around you, and like in your case maybe your kids, and you're just so focused on what you want to do. And in your case, for example, write really good email and copy and all of that, that all of these things actually in our conversation is just because it came up. Otherwise it's
Yeah.
like such a small item, that it's effectively a non-existent thing,
Yeah.
once you're so focused on actually doing what you're doing.
I think that's the
um,
key, right? Getting that focus, seeing that path, and just getting on it, right? And the reason I talk about it more is because when you're just starting out, these things feel huge. It
yes.
kept me off video calls for 10 years. Can you
Mm.
imagine where my content business could have gone
Oh
if
yeah.
I'd gotten past that fear? And when I did face that fear, it turned out to be a non item. And
Yeah, it was.
so it was nothing.
Yeah.
And I went through the same process that somebody else who is conventionally accepted in society and looks that way
Mm.
does. Right? I was super bad at discovery calls in the beginning. I would follow scripts because I would be
Mm.
so nervous. Clients or the leads would be able to tell that I was so nervous, and I would lose out on projects because I was so bad. But it doesn't get as easier, you get better. And this is again
Mm.
something that Joanna Weave taught me.
Mm.
I maybe bombed 50 discovery calls, but by the 60th, I had started to get better.
Mm.
And
Mhm.
now I don't even need to prep. I mean, I do if I'm I know that company beforehand.
Right.
But like if somebody would just book a call from my Calendly link, I
Yes.
know what questions to ask to get the information that I need to make the
Yep.
informed decision, and that just
Yep.
takes practice. So
Mm.
it's
It's
really just a matter
it's
of
more. Sorry. Yeah. Go
doing the
ahead.
work. Sorry.
Yeah, like you're like you said, you're more focused on the work now than any of these things. So I think that's why a lot of the filters go away, because you're like, oh, this is like, let's focus on the work at hand rather than all the other things. Because I think a lot of times you also sort of, let's say, go into this entire thing that we want, let's say we sort of speak our insecurities into conversation and reality. So a lot of times it's like you're expecting something, but the other person is just normal, and they just
Yeah.
focus on work. So a lot of times I think it's just, for most of us, it's just like focus on the work, and then everything else will take care of itself. I think that's the right way to do it. Yes, so like all of this, but then we all talk about the networking very quickly.
Yes.
How do you meet all these cool people? So there's Val, you mentioned Joanna
Yeah.
Weeb, and like copy hackers. There's a lot of other people, and you have a decent following on Twitter. Definitely not from shit posting on Twitter. I know for a fact, because I went through your feed, and you haven't randomly popped up with lots of followers. It's been a
Yeah.
gradual process. So
Yeah.
how important do you think networking has been for you in terms of Twitter, and like generally having like those kinds of people around you?
Yeah. Okay. So full disclosure, I am a shit networker.
Okay.
I I don't know people in the industry as many as I should, and that's totally on me though, because I am socially awkward. I am shy. I'm an introvert, and it's
Mhm.
extremely hard for me to approach somebody,
Mhm.
right? But on the other hand, Twitter is my water cooler. It's
Mhm.
where I go dump all of my thoughts that are keeping me from focusing on work, essentially.
Mhm.
So if you notice, if you go through my profile, I don't really tweet about email a lot. It's
Yeah.
stuff about my kids, it's stuff about my
Yes.
day, it's
Mhm.
me trying to make something of my home office these days. All of that, right? And in there somewhere is an email
Mhm.
tweet or the other, right? But I was, because I'm socially awkward, I was also socially awkward on Twitter when I first started, right?
Mhm.
I used to think I have to be so smart to stand out on Twitter.
Yeah.
But what I really needed to do was talk about my day. But like jokes apart, if you are trying to grow your following on Twitter, and you are having trouble coming up with what to tweet about, go join conversations.
Mhm.
Go boost other people up. Go reply to their tweets. Go RT their tweets. and just get involved. You don't have to even say anything to start contributing. And it's a long game. It will take time. It took me 6 months to ramp up engagement.
Mhm.
And um, from there, like I haven't done anything with that engagement basically. I'm still
Mm.
tweeting random stuff, but it's working, right? And I had no idea that my network or my Twitter following would come through the way it did when I sent out a
Mm.
call for appearing on podcasts.
Oh yeah,
Um,
yeah, yeah. That's how
that's
we
how,
actually.
yeah, that's how
Yeah.
we got introduced. And within 3 days, I had booked 10 podcasts.
Mm.
And that
Mm-hmm.
is phenomenal. I could have tried to pitch podcasts on my own and I wouldn't have gotten where I did with one tweet in 30 days if I tried.
Oh yeah. Oh
Um,
yeah. Mm.
and so I feel like, and also not just Twitter, stick to a social network that feels the most natural to you, right?
Mm.
I have a very good friend who is also an email strategist. She is a natural at Instagram.
Mm.
And
Mm-hmm.
I am in awe of all the clients that are coming to her through Instagram. When I was on Instagram for 6 months, it didn't do anything for me until I gave up on it. And I was like, you know what? Twitter is my thing. That's where I'm going to stick. That's my zone of genius. And so for her, brands are reaching out in her Instagram DMs. For me, founders are reaching out in my Twitter DMs. And so
Mm.
go with the one that feels that you're the most interested in or that feels the most natural to you and just go with that. Stick to one.
Quick shout out again to Val,
Yeah,
because she's very encouraging on Twitter as well. I think she keeps on like propping everybody up within a network, so that's pretty cool.
absolutely.
Um, so we, I think, went into a good amount of like process, but I also want to talk about like tools. You mentioned one tool before the podcast. You
Yeah.
didn't tell me the name, but you got to help us out. Like, are you a very excessive tool person? Do you think like there are specific email tools that people should use? Because a lot of like, I think there's like so much time spent on like just comparison sites and trying out different trials and which one's better. And it's so popular to actually do the comparison that everybody uses it as a page on their all these tools use it, that they have comparison pages. So which ones are your favorite ones?
I always say for somebody who's in SaaS, I tend to mess up my tech the first time, every time,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And so the only thing I would recommend is Whimsical. It's a flowchart mapping tool, which is super important in my work because I'm mapping out email journeys, I'm mapping out email sequences. And so that is the one tool that made flowcharts extremely simple for
Mm-hmm.
me. And that was it. That is my one tool. So Funnelytics somehow doesn't do it for me. Their
Mm.
UX does not make sense to me. It is cluttery. It gets very confusing very fast. Whimsical somehow, at least the way my brain is wired, works for me.
Mm. So whimsical in terms of mapping everything out. Do you
Yeah.
have a particular preference in terms of like the email deliverability, or any sort of, let's say, Klaviyo, is something that people use for like actually sending out the emails? Do you take care of that piece within the
I
thing,
don't.
or
So I
you
one of
don't?
the things I
Yes.
always tell my clients when they reach out is that I'm not an agency. I don't provide end-to-end email marketing services. I am
Mm.
strictly email strategy and copy only. So
Mm.
implementation is I can make introductions to my clients,
Sure.
but that is not something that I would be handling for them.
Got it. All right, cool. So we just stick with whimsical on the mapping side of things in
Yeah.
terms of strategy. Any people that have played a big role in your, let's say,
Yes.
or
So
yeah.
many.
So
So
this,
many.
this is always an unfair question, because whenever I do ask, people, start to sort of, let's say, immediately names start popping into people's head, and they're like, "Oh, there's so many. How do I name them?" And I'm like, "Okay, name the ones that come to your head."
Okay.
Let's say,
So I
and
have an entire
yeah,
list, and
go for it.
interestingly, most of them are women. I
Nice.
think
Okay.
all of them are women. First up, James Chartrand for that first writing course that I took.
Mm.
Second is Joanna Weeb for starting 10x freelance copywriter and kicking my ass into gear.
Mm.
Next up is Val Geyser for giving me start in my email
Mhm.
journey. And then comes Prerna Malik of Content Bistro. She's a launch strategist and copywriter. Brilliant mastermind and coach. I was in an accelerator program of hers for 3 months, and it just kickstarted all my authority and all my
Mm.
growth from there.
Mhm.
In my newsletter, Emails Done Right is her brainchild. I kept protesting throughout the day, throughout our time together. It's like, Val is already saying whatever I want to say. I don't have anything new to say. She's already saying it. So many other people are already. She's like, they're not saying it the way you are going to say it, and just
Mm.
start. And so, just to pacify her, I started my newsletter. And the first thing was, I'm I'm going to play it safe. I'll just do a tear down. And that first
Mm.
email was me tearing down an email. And then that was like the floodgates opening, because from then on, every Wednesday before I would sit down to write an email, an idea would come to
Mm.
me. And my emails were the basis for my Litmus Live talk. Somebody from Pinterest saw my Litmus Live talk and reached out a year later when they needed help. And so it just started a chain reaction, which I'm still seeing the benefits of to this day. The
Mm.
newsletter is also the reason I have been able to sell out my course twice,
Mhm.
both times that I've launched. And lastly, Amy Posner, who was my current business coach, December 2020, I had hit six figures, but I was burned out. And so she
Mm.
was my coach at a time. And I mean, I was looking for a coach at the time. When I talked to her, I said, I want to slow down. I don't care if I don't make enough money, like the same amount of money that I did in 2020,
Mhm.
but help
Mhm.
me slow down. And not
Mhm.
only has she helped me slow down, she's helped me double my business. And so
Mhm.
she is one person, like all of these women have played a pivotal role in my career. And so shout out to all of them.
Brilliant. And normally I like to end with like one piece of advice, which is always again very biased and like typically a very unfair thing to ask. But I like to pose it slightly differently. So imagine if there was a younger Samar in UAE, Pakistan, India, any of these Southeast Asian countries, whether it's a male, female, doesn't matter. Anybody who's young, just think of that person when you're saying this, and like, what is it that you would like leave them with? That if that person was sitting in front of you, what would you tell them, like one piece of, and you just had one thing to tell them?
Say yes first, freak out later.
Ah, nice. I like that.
And then
I like
attached
that.
to that is like you can figure things out. And if you don't, be confident in telling your client or whoever you're working with, if I can't figure out, I will go and find somebody who can.
Mhm.
And so just owning up to that with clients and leads has led to more work than I can tell you. Like, okay, so I can do this part really well. I'm not that confident about this, but I will figure it out. And if I can, I will go and find somebody who knows how to do this. Your project will not be compromised. You will get a polished, finished product. And that has taken me really, really far. And that is my advice to that.
Boom. All right, done. I think this is we're done with the episode. Like super cool stuff. Thank you so much for coming in. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.